Imagine this. 3 days have passed since you last ate anything at all. Your hands are shaking. Your thoughts feel slow, like they are moving through mud. You are not sick. You are not dieting. You simply cannot find food. Now stop imagining, because for most of human history, this was not a hypothetical. This was Tuesday. Today, hunger is a text message away from being solved. A tap on a screen, a knock at the door. We have forgotten what our own bodies were built to survive. Because for hundreds of thousands of years, going days without food was not rare. It was routine. And the evidence for that is not a guess. It is written into ancient bones and teeth. Let's start there. Scientists studying prehistoric skeletons look for something called enamel hypoplasia. Thin, faint grooves across the surface of a tooth. Each groove marks a moment when a growing child's body hit the brakes. Growth simply stopped because there was not enough fuel to continue it. Long bones carry a similar signature, called Harris lines. Bands inside the bone that form when the body pauses growing, then starts again. Researchers studying Paleolithic populations have found these markers again and again. Evidence, quite literally engraved into the skeleton, of repeated nutritional stress. This was not a one-time famine. For many groups, it appears to have been seasonal, recurring, expected. Now travel back further, much further. At Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, archaeologists uncovered the skull of a child who lived about 1.5 million years ago. The bone showed a condition called porotic hyperostosis, a pitted, spongy texture caused by severe anemia. That anemia is strongly linked to nutritional deficiency, often striking children right after weaning, when a toddler's diet shifts and gaps in nutrition appear. 1.5 million years ago, and a child's skull is already telling us the same story. Food was not guaranteed. So what did people do when the hunt failed and the land offered nothing obvious? For a long time, the popular image of our ancestors was simple. Big spears, bigger animals, a diet built almost entirely on meat. Recent isotope analysis is quietly rewriting that picture. At Taforalt cave in Morocco, researchers examined the bones and teeth of hunter-gatherers who lived between 13,000 and 15,000 years ago. By measuring chemical signatures locked into collagen and enamel, scientists could tell what these people had actually been eating, not what we assumed they ate. The results, published in the journal Nature Ecology and Evolution, pointed to something surprising. Plants, not meat, were their primary source of protein. Acorns, pine nuts, wild legumes. Foods that do not photograph well for a documentary, but foods that kept people alive. Because when the big game disappeared, someone still had to eat. And in a world without refrigerators, without grocery stores, without any guarantee of tomorrow, the plant on the ground was sometimes the only certainty you had. But eating what you found was only half the problem. The harder question was how to make food last. Because a good hunt today did not mean anything if half the meat rotted before the bad season arrived. So early humans became, in a very real sense, some of the first food scientists. Meat was cut into thin strips and hung in sun and wind, drying it out until bacteria had nothing left to feed on. In colder regions, people dug pits straight into the permafrost, turning frozen ground into a natural freezer that could hold meat for months. Archaeologists have found cache pits like this across Alaska, some lined carefully with birch bark and grass to protect what was buried inside. Some researchers believe hides soaked in water were also used to wrap food, the slow evaporation pulling heat away and keeping the contents cool, much like sweat cools human skin. None of this was an accident. It was knowledge, tested through hunger, and passed down because the alternative was starving in silence months later. But even careful storage had limits. Sometimes there was nothing stored and nothing left to find. This is where the story gets harder to look at directly. In Myzyka Cave, in southern Poland, archaeologists examined the bones of people known as the Magdalenians, who lived around 18,000 years ago. Published in the journal Scientific Reports, the study found unmistakable signs of cannibalism. Cut marks, deliberate breakage, patterns that matched how these same people butchered animals for food. It is one of several Ice Age sites across Europe showing the same disturbing pattern. Researchers are careful here, and so should we be. Not every case was about hunger. Some may reflect conflict between rival groups. Others may point to ritual, a way of honoring the dead rather than discarding them. But some cases line up too closely with hard winters and collapsing resources to ignore. When climates turned harsh and competition for food intensified, at least some of these acts appear to have been about simple, desperate survival. It is uncomfortable. It is also human. When the alternative is watching your children starve, people throughout history have made choices that comfort was never designed to judge. Let's step back from the extreme to something almost as remarkable and far less grim. In Germany, at a site called Neumark Nord, archaeologists found something strange. Roughly 120,000 small bone fragments, packed into a tight cluster. The bones came from at least 172 large mammals, and they had all been smashed deliberately into pieces. This was not the mess of an animal feeding. This was a factory. Published in Science Advances in the year 2025, the study revealed that Neanderthals were crushing these bones, then boiling them in water. The goal was grease. Fat, rendered out of bone marrow and skimmed off the surface, once it cooled. Why go to all that trouble for something as unglamorous as fat? Because meat alone can kill you. It's a real condition, sometimes called rabbit starvation. Eat too much lean protein, without enough fat or carbohydrate, and the body cannot process it. In serious cases, it is fatal. The liver simply cannot keep up. So when the land turned lean in winter, and the deer and horses they hunted carried almost no fat on their muscle, Neanderthals needed another source. The answer was hiding inside the bone the whole time. Researchers now believe this grease-rendering site was intensive, planned, and strategic. Carcasses were carried in from elsewhere and processed at one dedicated location. This was not desperation. This was logistics. And it happened roughly 125,000 years ago. Nearly 100,000 years earlier than scientists thought this kind of behavior began. Here is where the story takes a turn that most people do not expect. We tend to picture starvation as something that simply happened to ancient humans, a tragedy inflicted from the outside. But the human body itself appears to be built around the expectation of hunger. When food disappears, your body does not just shut down. It switches fuel sources. Liver glycogen breaks down first. Then, gradually, the body shifts toward burning stored fat, producing molecules called ketones to feed the brain instead of sugar. Researchers studying this adaptive starvation response describe it as a defining feature of the environment humans evolved in. Your ability to think, to move, to keep functioning after missing several meals in a row is not an accident. It is a feature that was selected for, generation after generation, by ancestors who did not always know where the next meal was coming from. In other words, hunger did not just threaten early humans. It shaped them from the inside out. Which leads to a bigger idea, one worth sitting with for a moment. We often talk about fire, tools, and language as the great inventions that made us human. But scarcity may have been just as powerful a teacher. It pushed our ancestors to notice which roots were safe, which bones held the most fat, which seasons demanded planning, not just instinct. Every skill that let a group survive a lean month got passed down, refined, and passed down again. In a very real sense, some of human intelligence may have been forged not in comfort, but in hunger. Of course, it would be a mistake to paint every prehistoric day as a crisis. Some researchers push back on the idea that early hunter-gatherers were constantly starving. Studies of certain modern hunter-gatherer groups have found them to be reasonably well-nourished, not living in perpetual famine. The honest picture is probably somewhere in between. Long stretches of manageable scarcity, punctuated by genuinely brutal seasons or years. Where you lived, what you hunted, and how harsh your winters were, all changed the equation completely. There was no single ancient experience of hunger. There were thousands of them, scattered across continents and millennia. But across nearly all of them, one pattern holds. Food was never something to take for granted. Every strip of dried meat, every pit dug into frozen ground, every bone cracked open for a few more calories of fat was a small act of defiance against an uncertain future. So the next time your stomach growls an hour before lunch, and it feels like an emergency. Remember what your body actually evolved to handle. Somewhere behind you, in a chain stretching back over 1,000,000 years, someone survived far worse than a missed meal. They cracked bones for the fat hidden inside. They learned which bitter root would not kill them. They buried meat in frozen ground and made impossible choices when even that ran out. They passed down, quietly, the knowledge that kept a species alive long enough to become us. We are not the descendants of the strongest humans, or even the smartest. We are the descendants of the ones who figured out how to eat when there was almost nothing left to eat at all. That is not a footnote in our history. That is the story underneath all the others. Hunger did not defeat the human species. It built it.